crisis, and we'll talk with her about that. But first, I have a very interesting topic to discuss. And, as the workers, the National Guard and the FEMA people, neighbors helping neighbors, work to save people's lives from these devastating floods down in Houston. Well, in Australia, in the state of Victoria, elected officials are now saying it's time to get out of the way down in Houston. For people who want a in Australia, in the state of Victoria, elected officials are now saying it's time to get out of the way down in Houston. Well, in Australia, in the state of Victoria, elected officials are now saying it's time to get out of the way down in Houston to go ahead and request this help from a doctor to kill themselves. In the Netherlands, they've had assisted suicide for a long time. They're debating a proposal to extend their euthanasia laws to allow all people over 75 the right to assisted suicide. And this story out of the state of California, and this is by our guest, Wesley Smith, who will be joining me in just a moment. At the University of California in San Francisco, the doctors there refused help to assist a doctor to kill themselves in their suicide that they requested. The family members are suing them. This is posted at pointofview.net. I'm telling you the truth. It's not fake news. With me to discuss this is Wesley Smith. He is a lawyer. He's an award-winning author. He's senior fellow at the Discovery Institute's Center on Human Exceptionalism. He's written a book called The Culture of Death, The Age of Do No Harm Medicine. Wesley, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Penna. It's the age of do harm medicine. That's the problem.
Yeah, I added a word there. Sorry about that. Totally mixed the message.
That's because people still believe that, the healthcare system is based on the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. Unfortunately, most doctors do no longer take the Hippocratic Oath, and under the influence of mainstream bioethics, we're moving away from a sanctity, equality of life ethic in healthcare to one based on utilitarian standards that view some lives as having greater value than others.
So in Australia, I know that's halfway around the world from the U.S., but I think it's sort of perhaps signals a bit of what's going to be happening here with this attitude, this culture of death. And you've got church leaders speaking up against this. I read in the Anglican News, they're saying it is right to seek to eliminate pain, but never right to eliminate people. But that's becoming a view that's rarer and rarer, isn't it?
Well, it's a struggle. I've been to Australia touring the nation twice, speaking against euthanasia. They've had this advocacy for a long time, and so far it's been able to be stopped. Of greater concern is Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada, I believe it was in 2014, made up in 2015, issued a national imposition of euthanasia across the country. And in fact, did not limit it to people who are terminally ill, but included people with disabilities and even people with psychological pain caused by a medically diagnosed condition. You now have people being killed by doctors all across of Canada, and the province of Ontario has passed a law that says if a doctor, let's say, is a Catholic doctor, a Christian doctor, a doctor who believes in the Hippocratic Oath, atheist or whatever, who doesn't believe that healthcare and medicine includes killing, if they have a moral, conscientious objection to euthanasia, they had better either do the euthanasia when asked by a legally qualified patient or find a doctor willing to kill, or they could actually lose their medical licenses to practice. So you're now finding doctors who once swore in the Hippocratic Oath not to conduct assisted suicide. That's a specific prohibition in the Hippocratic Oath, under threat of punishment if they don't commit euthanasia, meaning lethal injection. It's really quite stunning.
Well, it is. I noticed in your piece about California that the claim of this family who was suing the University of California at San Francisco Medical Center about their parent, the primary claim in their suit is elder abuse. You're abusing a patient by not killing.
Yes, this is truly frightening. Now, the claim of the family of this cancer patient who died was that UCSF told her, the patient, that they would be willing to do assisted suicide when, in fact, they decided not to do it. And by the way, the law of California that legalized assisted suicide specifically states that no doctor can be punished for refusing to participate. It's a conscience protection. It was what was required to get the California Medical Association to go neutral on the bill.
Do they have that in Oregon? Do they have a conscience?
They do. Yes, they have. The 5 states in this country have legalized assisted suicide: California, Oregon, Washington, Vermont, and Colorado. That's by statute. And all of those states have a conscience protection. The Washington, D.C. also has that. Montana, there's a court decision that's kind of muddled that basically says assisted suicide is not against public policy, and there is no specific law about that, and that's still pretty muddled.
Wow.
But that realize that these conscience protections that exist today aren't meant to stay there. They're meant to get people to say, oh, well, we can do this, and to pretend it's just this tiny little change in medical ethics. But as this lawsuit demonstrates, as what's happening in Canada demonstrates, once a society comes to widely accept the idea that killing is an acceptable answer to human suffering, these conscience protections will grow under increasing attack. In fact, there's a lawyer, the woman bringing the case, Catherine Tucker, who used to be a lawyer for Compassion and Choices, which was once called the Hemlock Society, and they're the people who are the primary proponents of assisted suicide in this country. She says there should be no guidelines because she's letting the mask off, and that it should just be based on standard practice, whatever that might mean.
Whatever the patient wants. Wesley, I've got to jump in. I've got a break. But ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net. Check out Wesley Smith's 2 articles, the one about the California lawsuit and also the young and the vulnerable. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, the mainstream media has done a respectable job of identifying the alt-right and explaining who they are. I've devoted time on my radio program to do the same. But another group hasn't been given much publicity. That would be the group Antifa. In fact, Ben Shapiro calls it the group that got ignored in Charlottesville. The group is a loosely connected band of anti-capitalist protesters on the far left that also designate themselves as anti-fascist. They have been the center of many protests and street riots since the 1990s. We've seen them protesting globalization at the World Trade Organization meetings, but they're probably best known for 2 events. They were visible at the University of California, Berkeley riots that were protesting Milo Yiannopoulos, and they were visible at the Charlottesville riots where they clashed with the alt-right, white supremacist, and neo-Nazis. Even though Antifa engaged in street violence in Charlottesville, much of the media ignored their actions. It's easy to see why. Cheryl Gay Stolberg of the New York Times tweeted this comment. She said, "The hard left seemed as hate-filled as alt-right. I saw club-wielding Antifa beating white nationalists being let out of the park." It didn't take more than a few minutes for the backlash. One responder tweeted, "Don't buy into the false equivalency like Trump and sympathizers." Soon, Stolberg said that she was rethinking her earlier tweet and modified the next tweets. In a recent column, Austin Peterson wrote that you can reject Antifa and communists and alt-right Nazis at the same time. Unfortunately, he observed that Antifa activists are gathering steam and seem to be protected from much scrutiny because of the way the press covers riots and street violence. The obvious solution is to condemn evil, hate, and violence wherever it occurs and from whatever source. Politicians and media would be wise to learn. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett, now playing rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My guest is Wesley Smith with the Discovery Institute, and his book, and I'll say the title correctly this time, The Culture of Death, The Age of Do-Harm Medicine. We're talking about physician-assisted suicide today, and there's one story that I noticed out of the Netherlands. Talk about the slippery slope of conscience protections. In the Netherlands, there's a married couple that actually got to have a physician-assisted suicide together. These requests are not normally allowed, but the daughter of this couple said it was her parents' deepest wish in light of their circumstances. They gave each other a big kiss and passed away holding hands. And so, these laws that are strict, Wesley, at one point, they die away, they wither away. And the whole, the goal of it has been to get assisted suicide and, no exceptions, correct?
Well, we're talking in the Netherlands and Belgium, where this has also occurred, about lethal injection, where you don't just have a doctor giving a person poison pills to take. They're actually killing them, homicide. And in fact, this idea of joint euthanasia killings is beginning to increase. There have been at least 3 couples killed by euthanasia in Belgium that I'm aware of. There may have been more. And there have been a couple in the Netherlands. And one of the cases in Belgium, the couple wasn't even sick, but they were worried about future grief. And so their son, imagine this, their son arranged for the euthanasia and told the Guardian newspaper, or it might have been the Daily Mail newspaper in the UK, this was the only decision because, after all, if they needed me, I wouldn't have been able to take care of them. So the son made sure to put his parents out of his misery. It's truly a stunning development. I remember not too long ago when if you had joint suicides by elderly couples, it was considered a tragedy. Now it's considered a, quote, right to die, close quote. And there have been story after story in the mainstream media about that Dutch joint euthanasia killing, and it's all been positively reported. They went out their own way. This was what they wanted, so forth and so on. So you see a media in the tank for suicide. Is it any wonder we see suicide prevention campaigns beginning to wither on the vine in terms of public notice and public attention? And also, they don't try to limit all suicides anymore. They completely leave the issue of assisted suicide out of their advocacy, I guess, because they don't want to be controversial. But when you say you're against suicide, it's either all suicides or just some suicides, and that's like saying don't smoke, but if you smoke a filter cigarette. I mean, it's just wrong, and it sends a terrible message that some lives are not worth preserving and protecting from themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, we posted Wesley Smith's articles, 2 of them, one about the California Hospital, University of California at San Francisco, being sued for refusing to assist suicide, but also The Young and the Vulnerable. And it's published in the Weekly Standard. We linked to it at pointofview.net. And this was so interesting, Wesley, because we're talking about, you talk about polio here, and that's my generation. People were getting polio, and everything, all stops were pulled out to save these kids and give them an adult life. And we know people who have survived polio and are living productive lives now. And even if they weren't productive, they'd be human, and we're saving. And so, we wonder now, if something like this were to happen in the United States, would we pull out those stops at this point in our culture? Would we value life the way we did back then, or would it be different? What do you think?
Yeah, I had the idea for that article, listening to an introduction by David Osteen, who's the head of National Right to Life Committee, and I was going to give a presentation on euthanasia to some of the National Right to Life people, and he was introducing me, and he happened to mention, which I hadn't known, that when he was a kid, and I'm of that generation too, that he had polio, and he talked about how hard the medical system worked to try to not only save his life, but do what they could to maximize his capacities. And I remember as a kid being terrified of polio because every year, especially in the summer, was called polio season, as I recall, and the polio kids getting polio would make the news, and you'd see pictures of these polio wards with children, you know, child after child after child in an iron lung, with just their heads sticking out of these big breathing machines. And I was really afraid when I was young that could happen to me. I even had nightmares about it. And so I started thinking, after listening to David Osteen's introduction and his comment, which was almost an aside, I thought, well, what if we had that kind of a terrible epidemic sweep the country again today, year after year after year? Would the same kind of effort be made now that was made then? And I had to express my doubts, because in those days, medicine was practiced on a sanctity, equality of life basis, meaning, you know, we're not going to decide whether this child is going to have a life worth living or, quote, a good quality of life. We're going to save that child's life, and we're going to do whatever we can, obviously, to help them be as healed as possible. But we're not going to turn our backs on somebody because they had to continue to remain in an iron lung. And in fact, a good friend of mine, Mark O'Brien, who, if your listeners wish to, can look him up, Mark O'Brien, and the documentary Breathing Lessons, which was Academy Award-winning documentary about him. He was my age, 1 month younger than me. He got polio when he was 6, and he lived to be not quite 50, and he spent almost all of his remaining 44 years in an iron lung. And he became an anti-assisted suicide advocate. He became an independent living advocate. He lived in his own apartment with an independent living helper in his iron lung. And the question became, what would happen today? And I pointed out that we had moved away from, let's say, do no harm medicine to do harm medicine, meaning we are beginning to decide whether somebody should go on living based on how we perceive their quality of life. And so I worried that you might find some parents being pushed to say, well, you know, his life will never be worth anything, you better let him go. Or that perhaps in the future we might have healthcare rationing. It's being pushed in the New England Journal of Medicine and other places based on what's called the quality adjusted life year. In other words, healthcare rationing based on a quality of life, medical discrimination type of formula. And so I can't, you know, obviously describe the whole article, but it is online, as you pointed out. And I hope people will read it, because it will, I think, demonstrate how things have changed since those horrible polio days when children were saved to today, where certainly we would try to take care of children, save their lives. But over time, perhaps the most disabled among the children afflicted by that kind of a disease, and particularly if people had a cognitive disability, meaning that their mental capacities were afflicted, they might not receive the same kind of care.
Again, you can go to pointofview.net and click through to Wesley Smith's 2 articles, especially this one we've just been discussing, the young and the vulnerable. And, you know, I mean, when the topic that has to come right to mind right now with a lot of our listeners is Obamacare, or single-payer health care, that we are just debating right now in this country. And, you know, you have an amazing number of people, Wesley, who say that they actually are for socialized medicine. They want to see this. They think single-payer is the best way to go. But, I mean, whenever you have anything like that, you know that cost is going to be a huge factor. And so when you mention this quality of life calculation that takes place, it's very specific in the United Kingdom, for instance. I mean, what's to say we wouldn't have that same thing here?
Nothing. That quality adjusted life year formula is used in the United Kingdom to specifically ration care. There's healthcare rationing in the United Kingdom based on age. There are all kinds of methods by which some people do not get the same kind of care they would want to. In fact, there was just there was a headline I saw from the UK that 1 million people there, even though it's single-payer socialized medicine, can't get their own doctor. You see the same thing in Canada. They have a single-payer system, although it's a different form. And the way they ration in Canada is they make people wait a long time for many procedures. In fact, they even fly people to the United States to conduct them. Well, if you needed surgery, would you want to fly from Dallas up to Denver to have it, or would you want to be able to have it in Dallas?
Right.
There's real problems with that kind of a system that I think a lot of people haven't considered. And by the way, when Vermont, they passed a single payer law, and they were debating how do we pay for this, they came up with two ways: one, healthcare rationing, and two, assisted suicide. The Canadians, which has a single payer system, have estimated they will save millions and millions of dollars because of their euthanasia law. Now, interestingly,
okay, Wesley, you have made this point. We're going to have to delve deeper in on another occasion, but I appreciate you joining me today. This is scary information, ladies and gentlemen. Go to pointofview.net and read more. We'll be back.
From Affirm Films and Provident Films, who brought you War Room, comes All Saints. New pastor Michael Spurlock, his struggling congregation, and a group of refugees come together, trusting God as they plant seeds for a future that might just save them all.
Start a farm, we work together, we save the church.
All Saints, starring John Corbett. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at allsaintsmovie.com.
Point of View Radio wants to fuel change in our culture, but we need your help to do it. And I use the word need very intentionally. I worked with a well-known radio ministry for 29 years, a program that helped a lot of people. They got saved, they got elected to Congress. It produced a lot of good. But people started thinking that someone else would give, and that program isn't here anymore. Your gift today can make sure that doesn't happen to Point of View. Visit pointofview.net and click the banner Change Happens With You, or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. And as I mentioned early in the program, my heart is in Houston today. And we're about 250 miles from there in Dallas. It's get a little bit of rain here and there. And it serves to remind those of us who are safe that we should be praying for our neighbors. And, when you're in a country and there's a disaster taking place, you hurt. Part of you hurts. When you're in the same state, it's even more. And I think that's what a lot of Texans are feeling now. And I know that we are on hundreds of stations across the nation, and all of you are feeling the same thing. And I want to send you, if you've got a desire to help financially, we are funneling resources through to Samaritan's Purse. They're on the ground there, and we may hear from them a little bit later in the program. But you can go to pointofview.net, and there's a big banner, disaster relief for Hurricane Harvey, which is there, and you can donate in just whatever amount the Lord would have you do. We wanted to provide that because so many people want ways to give. And so we're doing that. But I also want to take calls from you at 800-351-1212, especially if you know anything about what's going on there that might be different from what we see in the news. If you've got family there that you would encourage us to pray for. One of the things that has happened, and I know people in Houston, but their brothers and sisters here in the Dallas Metroplex can't reach them because the cell towers and the wireless facilities are not working. So that's very difficult. I also noticed, too, because one person who's been in the news a lot about this has been our Senator, Ted Cruz. And I noticed that he is actually in Houston. That's where his home is. And instead of leaving to go meet with Governor Greg Abbott and Senator John Cornyn, I think they were all supposed to meet in Corpus Christi today to sort of strategize. He couldn't go because he can't get out of Houston. But we're trying to reach him, too. We'll see if we can talk to Ted Cruz. But whether or not we can talk to people, our prayers can certainly be offered for that. And, just so much is going on there. I've been trying to kind of look at the news so we could summarize some of the stories that are so moving. There was this one viral photo, probably many of you saw this, in Dickman, Texas. It was at the La Vida Bella nursing home. And the picture, first of all, when you first look at it, you don't realize that these senior citizens are sitting in water up to their waists. Some of them are in wheelchairs. Others are sitting on sofas. And they're just sitting there very calmly. Apparently, from the reports, they were fairly calm. And these elderly people were eventually evacuated. But that was quite a storm. In past storms, and Houston and that area of Texas gets a lot of storms. And so people, were just kind of saying, even though this one was supposed to be the worst ever, that, they've really endured others, and so they'll endure this one. But this one's the worst by far. And so the jury is out on how this is going to affect the state and even ultimately the nation. But there are shelters in Dallas. We had about 500 people in our city last night, and they're ready to move up to 5,000 people if necessary. And, when you think about these kinds of disasters, they'll get through it. They'll do some rebuilding. But as in Katrina, which isn't that far from where I am, some people just permanently relocate and change their life. This is a life-changing event, a weather event, people call it. They were calling it a 500-year event yesterday, and today I hear it being called an 800-year event. But, all these stories, I read another one of a family at a hotel, and I don't remember the name of the city. Oh, near MD Anderson in Houston. There's a family there. The father, I think, was getting treatment. And he was 3 days into it. It was a 5-day treatment, and he can't go now unless he probably can't get through the water to get there for the last 2 days. So he'll hang out in the hotel until the water goes away in a few days, and I guess get the rest of them. I read about a wedding that was canceled because of this. I'm sure there's a lot more of those stories. And a lot of people spending the nights at the 2 airports in Houston because they can't get out. Those airports are closed. And amazingly, tornadoes. Not only was there a hurricane, which is now a storm, getting rid of all this water over Houston, and causing all this devastation. But tornadoes threatening the area also, near constant warnings. Very hard, as I mentioned, to call loved ones. If you can drive, this is something I learned. I had no clue because I've never really lived in an area where the flooding has been this intense. If you can, there are areas of Houston that are okay. You know, people are up on higher ground, or they are sort of okay, but there's a lot of water around them. But the houses aren't flooded yet. If you drive up to a house, you should drive very slowly, because if you drive fast, you can actually cause flooding into the house with your vehicle. That was something I didn't know. So that's something I guess you learn in these kinds of cases. Did you know that cars can flood a house if they drive up too fast? Some of the things that these homes where people still are being asked to reposition their furniture, you know, move it upstairs. Move upstairs yourself, but don't go into the attic unless you have an axe to enable you to get out. You could get stuck there and drown. And then there's the whole controversy about whether or not the city of Houston should have been forced or asked to evacuate. And, of course, the governor said that anybody in low-lying areas from Houston over to Corpus Christi should think about evacuating, even though there wasn't an order to evacuate. And the way things work is it's the local authorities who are supposed to make the decision about evacuation. The Houston mayor said, no, stay in your homes if you can. And a lot of these people are being rescued now. So, you know, when you look in hindsight, you wonder what would have been better. Now, they did have a lot of deaths in 2005 from another hurricane with the evacuations. There were deaths from people that evacuated. So I'm sure he's thinking about that. Maybe he just wanted to oppose the governor. For some reason, I doubt that's the case, but some people are saying that. And getting all those millions of people on the roads of Houston could have been a nightmare and a disaster. It's already, I think, all the roads out of Houston are closed. So if you stayed, you're pretty much stuck now, at least at this point. And then there's the dams. A couple of reservoirs, they have to have the pressure released on them, or the damage will be worse. So water has been released from those to prevent more damage to homes, but that has also meant more water. So that's some of what's going on, and I'd love to hear from you. We've got people calling in, and I think this is a time when we should be discussing this here on Point of View. Again, let me send you to pointofview.net if you want to participate in disaster relief. We have just a really good way to funnel that through Samaritan's Purse. And so go to pointofview.net. It's very obvious. You can donate at disaster relief for Harvey. Donate now. Let's go to Raymond, listening in from California on KYCC. Thanks for calling in, Raymond.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, Penna.
Do you have family in Houston?
Yeah, actually, I have a daughter, and her ex-husband is there, and I have 3 grandkids. And interestingly enough, I got a wide assortment of reports. My daughter said, oh, we got some rain. It's no big deal. It's just a thing. My son says, well, we're doing the best we can to keep the water out of the house, but it keeps raining,
Wow.
and we don't have any power. So the power's turned off as well. Unfortunately, the 3 grandkids are actually staying with him right now, so he's got that to be concerned about as well. We're praying for him. We're lifting him up. We told him, look, if there's anything you need, if you need an airplane ticket, whatever is going to fix the problem, let me know.
Yeah, the problem is getting to the airport, and then the airport's closed.
Right. And they're dedicated Houstonians, boy. They're not giving up the ship. They want to stay and fight it out. You know, they feel like Sam Houston or somebody, I don't know, but.
So does your daughter
okay.
live in a higher area?
Apparently, yeah, because she's saying, you know, she drives to and from work, and the streets are holding water, but that's all right. That happens every year.
When did you talk to her?
My wife actually spoke with her day before yesterday.
Okay, but I wonder if things are different now.
I don't know. The rain has continued, and they've gained an awful lot of inches. She may be hurting a little bit now, although in her apartment complex, her apartment manager advised that they remove everything off the bottom floor. And she said that seemed like a lot of work for nothing, but she may be glad she did that now, see?
Yeah. Wow. Well, you know, Houstonians are used to flooding. I know that. I think that would be just a special kind of person that has to brave that every once in a while. But this one is very different from other floods that normally take place in Houston. So this is, I'd be interested to hear how she's doing. I hope that she's doing well and that she escapes this, and also your grandchildren and your son-in-law.
Yeah, I think they're gonna. I think my son-in-law is a pretty proactive guy. He's not gonna wait till it's too late. You know, he's gonna make things happen when he thinks that it has to happen. My daughter's a little more stubborn.
Wow. So is there water in your son-in-law's home?
You know, he said he's keeping it out. The last I heard, and I actually sent him a text yesterday and said, "How's everybody?" And he said, and his response was, "We're keeping the water out, but we're out of power." So,
wow. Well, thank you for calling, Raymond, with that report. We appreciate it. We are taking your calls, talking about Houston and Harvey, 800-351-1212.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 new cadets at the United States Military Academy at West Point do not want to wear the tar bucket. If you're not familiar with the uniform of West Point cadets, when on parade, cadets wear a plumed shako hat, or as they are commonly called, a tar bucket. The cadets object to wearing the hat because it would force them to remove their turban. That is a problem chiefly because the cadets are Sikh and the turban is a religious observance for the men. So while the United States Army has provided accommodation for Sikh soldiers in the past, this new lawsuit questions whether that accommodation need extend to the parade grounds. And it is an interesting question. Clearly, forcing the cadets to remove their turban would be, in the words of the cadets, blasphemous. Yet there is something to the tradition and uniformity found in the military dress of our nation's military academies. Congress, thankfully, has helped provide guidance in the settling of such matters. In the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, Congress insists that the government identify its compelling interest and restrict the free exercise of religion in the least restrictive manner possible whenever a citizen alleges a substantial burden to his free exercise of religion. RFRA does not guarantee an outcome in any case, but it does make the government justify its behavior. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Tropical storm Harvey has dumped more than 11 trillion gallons of water on Texas and counting. And a meteorologist at Weatherbill, which is a private forecasting firm, says there's still up to 16 trillion gallons more rain likely to fall in the state. You know, this is a time for prayer. I mean, I was reading just everything I could this morning, and one of the places I go is to Resurgent, Eric Erickson's website. And he was saying, we really should be praying. And, you think about all the resources we have. Oh, we have FEMA, who has 5,000 people working in Texas. 3,000 National Guard has been called out, 1,000 more today. And he says they can be there. They save lives. They clean up. They go home. But America is better than its government. Let's show the world why America is great. Challenge the media to raise money for those whose suffering really matters. And that's what we're doing here at pointofview.net. You can go to our website and you can click on the Donate Now button under the disaster relief banner. It says for Hurricane Harvey. It's a tropical storm now, but the damage from the rain is just, that's what's so concerning now, the flooding. People losing their homes. There has been some loss of life. And, the hospital, the main hospital, I forget the name of it, in downtown Houston, has been evacuated. So, even that. And then the airports, of course, are closed at this point. The roads going out of Houston are closed. So if you stayed, you pretty much have to stay right now, unless a helicopter takes you out. And there are all these rescue not vehicles, but the swift boats, the boats that are coming in to try to rescue people. And, they're doing the best they can. The 911 call, I think, call center is backed up. But people are encouraged to just keep trying. And, of course, then you have this whole Dunkirk effect. People have been called by government authorities to, if they've got boats of any sort, flat-bottom boats, to go in and help people, help their neighbors, and they're doing it. You're seeing it on television, and that's very gratifying. Well, let's take some more calls. We've got people calling in. Carolyn is listening in from Missouri on KTTK. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, Penna. How are you today?
Great. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for praying and for spearheading the recovery efforts. I really appreciate that. We're
a cog in the wheel trying to, just do our part on that. But, it's really hard to talk about other things right now.
Right. We are former Southern Baptist Disaster Relief volunteers, so I do appreciate what you're doing. My son-in-law was in Killeen, Texas, up by Fort Hood, and he is retired military, so he was available to help friends of his go down to Houston, tow his boat with his four-wheel drive, and get in there to help them. Now, these people were told that this person, that my son-in-law, was coming. He got within an hour of where he was going to go, the destination, and he met someone with an airboat that took them on in to Houston, contacted the people, and they refused to leave. They were warned that they were about to open the dam to bring more water into the city. They had their first floor completely flooded. Their second floor had 2 foot of water, and they absolutely refused to go, even though they knew that my son-in-law was coming. What in the world were they thinking? They endangered his life. He barely got out of there before they closed the roads and wouldn't let anybody out of the city just before they opened the dam and brought in 30 more inches of water.
I don't even know what to say to people. Their second floor already had water?
Yeah, 2 foot. And their first floor was gone. And, they're going to end up on the roof if they get there at all, I guess. But definitely prayers for these people. I also have a friend who lives in Dallas whose son and daughter-in-law were and grandson were in Houston, and she offered for them to come to Dallas. And her daughter-in-law did refuse to come. She is in one of the higher elevations there in the old city, and Carol said they had very, very big storm drains or whatever to accommodate.
Yeah, certain areas
water.
are okay, apparently.
I don't think it's going to accommodate that much water. But not only prayers for their safety, but also for their marriage and their salvation. This family, the entire family is not saved and doesn't care to be so. So perhaps the Lord would use this to bring some people to Him. I've certainly been praying for this entire family for a long time.
Okay.
I do appreciate it, Penna. Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling, and that's just
You're
those are
welcome.
some specific prayer requests. Yeah, pray for people's sanity, that they would not think that they can actually do something to save their home when the water is rising in the home. I mean, their lives are more important than that, and homes can be rebuilt, lives can be rebuilt, and I think sometimes people they rely on the government, or they rely on the fact that somebody's going to come and help them, because at the last minute these people could end up on their roof. And they're going to have to rely on somebody if the water keeps rising. And so I don't know, that's just crazy to me. In past storms, the streets would fill up in Houston and they would be drained within hours, but that's not happening now. And there's more water coming. So people just, it's just different this time. So thank you so much, Kay. This kind of gives us a picture of what is being faced there. And, it is a matter of prayer. And again, pointofview.net has an ability for you to help out financially if you want to give to disaster relief. And we're doing it through Samaritan's Purse. That's pointofview.net. Let me go to Carolyn. To Kay in Missouri, listening in on KNEO. I may have juxtaposed the names there. But Kay, thank you for calling in.
Oh, yes. I was just saying that my granddaughter lives in Houston, and she's been she is an RN, and so she wasn't on the one at the hospital for the disaster relief, but there she's supposed to be the one that relieves them, and she's stuck in her apartment on the fourth floor.
Is her hospital the one that was closed?
No, I think their hospital is open.
Okay.
It's close to whatever that bayou drainage area is, because they're rescuing people off the roofs around her.
Wow.
So it's like a 400 apartment complex, and so there's a lot of people. They're still there in that apartment. They're still all staying there.
So she can't get to work
out.
to even help out if she wanted to.
No, but she said when the dam released, she could now see the roads, but she's not going because she doesn't want to get out there and then run into it somewhere that she can't see. So she's waiting to because at least she knows she has food and water here, and she don't know what's going on in the hospital. But she needs to get back and be able to. So her parents were trying to think of something, but they're in Columbus, and now Columbus is starting to flood. So,
wow. Okay, well,
yeah,
she's probably
so
doing the wise thing.
Yeah, so
if she's in a safe place. Listen, Kay, I got to go.
Place.
Thank you for the report. We're up on against our break. And so thank you. Thank you, everybody that called in. We'll talk about this in the bottom of this second hour. We'll get back to this topic and take your calls. Right now, we're going to be joined by Carrie Severino to talk about the judicial confirmation crisis that's taking place in this country. Stay with us for more of Point of View. And again, for relief funds, if you want to help out, go to pointofview.net.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for the second hour of Point of View. And as I mentioned in the last hour, I am sitting in Dallas, Texas, 250 miles from Houston, where there's just a disaster of epic proportions having to do with a hurricane turned tropical storm and so much rain and flooding and devastation. And we've been discussing that, and we will allow you to call in a little bit later on that issue. But many of you have been asking what you can do to help. And certainly if you've got an opportunity to help someone that's there, if you've got a boat, whatever, I mean, that's being encouraged. But also... we are partnering with Samaritan's Purse, Franklin Graham's organization. They have people on the ground distributing supplies, and anything that you give through Point of View, and it's at pointofview.net, there's a banner there to donate, will go 100% to them and go to help the victims in Houston. You can give online, again, by going to pointofview.net, disaster relief for Harvey, or you can mail a check if you'd like to do that, P.O. Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221, and put a note that it's for relief for Harvey. Ladies and gentlemen, there is another crisis, and the next guest, my next guest, who's a frequent guest here on Point of View, Carrie Severino, she is from the Judicial Crisis Network. She's chief counsel and policy director there. You see her a lot on television. She also briefs Congress and senators on judicial nominations. I didn't realize till I read this bio, she's a graduate of Harvard Law School. She went to Duke University, and she has a master's degree in linguistics. Carrie, you are well educated. We are so glad to have someone of your stature working in this issue. And, you know, it's the president's prerogative to change the judiciary. How is President Trump doing?
You know, he's doing great. It's not just his prerogative, but I think after this last election, it's really a mandate, because we saw more people going to the polls than I know of any other presidential campaign, where the Supreme Court in particular, but the courts in general, were top on their interest level. A fifth of the voters said that was their number one issue. So he promised that he'd put people on the court in the mold of Justice Scalia, who are going to be faithful to the Constitution, faithful to the law, putting that before their own policy preferences. Boy, he knocked it out of the park with Justice Neil Gorsuch, but he's continuing to make really great nominations, especially to the appellate courts. And now our current crisis is the Democrats realize this is a threat to them. They don't want to see people on these courts who are going to get in the way of activist judges who are just single-handedly trying to enact by other means the laws that the liberal Democrats can't get through the Congress. So they want to make sure that they keep the activists as the majority on the courts. They don't want to see Trump putting people in these places. So they're trying a lot of procedural routes to slow down the confirmations. And what we've seen is, since Trump took office, he started office with a record number of vacancies. They've skyrocketed. There's now a third more vacancies. We have 139 federal vacancies out there that the Democrats are trying to slow walk people for, and this is going to be a real problem.
So rather than make progress, we've actually lost ground.
And it's shocking. I know. It's really, we've had 4 confirmations, and we started with 105 vacancies. 4 people have been confirmed, but now we're up to 139 vacancies. So, and there's at least 20 more judges who we know of who have said they're getting ready to retire, and, as of such and such date or something, I'm going to step down. So it's just continuing to balloon. We really need to make some progress, because the Senate's not keeping up with the number of vacancies that are out there.
Okay, so a couple of things having to do with Senate rules that I need you to explain. One is demanding 30 hours of debate. Now, this is possible to have 30 hours of debate, but they historically have not done this on every nominee, have they?
Right. This is it's a thing where the Democrats can trigger for certain nominees a requirement to spend 30 hours debating someone. Really, practically, you've seen
it's
that
a long
most
time.
Of the time people didn't. Yeah, they would. That's a lot of time to spend with someone. They're doing it not just for a few people who are really controversial, which is what had happened in the past, and most of them would be kind of a voice vote, just all in favor, aye, moving on. They're requiring this for everyone. And let me tell you one that I think is the most egregious. This is a judge that President Trump had been nominated by President Obama. He renominated him as a goodwill gesture. Just said, okay, fine. This guy didn't have quite enough time to get his hearing. And the Republican senators he's associated with say he's an okay candidate. Let's renominate him. He had 100% support in the Senate. Every Democrat voted for him. Every Republican voted for him. They still insisted that they spend 30 hours of debate on someone who is utterly uncontroversial. And that's the kind of tricks they've been doing. So 100% of Trump's nominees, they've made go through this long, cumbersome process. And it's really just wasting the Senate's time. I mean, because, of course, they have nothing better to do, like health care or tax reform. I mean, goodness, we know they have
or the other nominees in the White House.
Inappropriate.
Carrie, what about the blue slip?
Farther behind on administration stuff.
Yeah, that's right. even worse. What about the blue slips? The senators get to offer a blue slip which says yes or no on their nominees from their state. Is that a problem right now, too?
Yes, because we've seen that Democrat senators, it used to be the kind of thing you turn it around within a week. These are Democrat senators who are supposed to be the ones who know more about their state than anyone else, but what they're doing is using it to kind of just tread water and say, oh, well, we're still looking into this person. We're still trying to read up on them. You know what, guys, this isn't a Supreme Court confirmation. You don't have to take months and months and months for each of these people. And really what it seems that they're trying to do is block particularly the most qualified appellate nominees because it scares them, the idea of having these people on the bench. So that's something that I think we're going to have to see the Senate push back on and say, hey, it's a nice gesture of, get some input from the home state senators when you can, but this is being abused. We can't hold up these confirmations forever. Let's just set a deadline, and then we're going to move forward.
So it involves rules changes?
That wouldn't even take a rules change. That would just take Senator Grassley from Iowa, who's the head of the Judiciary Committee, to say, look, this is being abused. That's not what it was for, and we're gonna have to just move forward. Or even just going back to every Judiciary Committee chairman had a different way of doing it. He could just go back and say, you know what, we're doing it like they used to. You've got a week, done. Mm-hmm. And I think that would help light some fire under them because they're just going to stay there as long as they can and plead ignorance until they're really being forced to move on these people. And it's not fair to the American people. It's not fair to these excellent nominees who are just living in limbo. So that process it needs to be scrapped if it's going to be abused like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Carrie Severino from the Judicial Crisis Network is going to stay with me for the next segment. We're going to continue to talk about this. They have a big effort to get some changes and get this whole situation changed so that this President Donald Trump, can get his judicial nominees populating the courts. It's so important. We know here on Point of View how important the courts are. The issues that we care about come before the courts, and there will be more and more of them. And we need to use the opportunity of now having a Republican Senate who would actually confirm President Bush's nominees to actually vote on them. And, the Democrats right now are using a lot of tactics to kind of slow this process down. You slow it down long enough and you affect the numbers that this president gets to put on the courts. And that is just unconscionable. And, of course, a Judicial Crisis Network has a plan. And Carrie's going to describe that to us. Ladies and gentlemen, before I go to the break, let me also send you, if you want to help with disaster relief, to pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, the mainstream media has done a respectable job of identifying the alt-right and explaining who they are. I've devoted time on my radio program to do the same. But another group hasn't been given much publicity. That would be the group Antifa. In fact, Ben Shapiro calls it the group that got ignored in Charlottesville. The group is a loosely connected band of anti-capitalist protesters on the far left that also designate themselves as anti-fascist. They have been the center of many protests and street riots since the 1990s. We have seen them protesting globalization at the World Trade Organization meetings, but they're probably best known for two events. They were visible at the University of California, Berkeley riots that were protesting Milo Yiannopoulos, and they were visible at the Charlottesville riots where they clashed with the alt-right, white supremacist, and neo-Nazis. Even though Antifa engaged in street violence in Charlottesville, much of the media ignored their actions. It's easy to see why. Cheryl Gay Stolberg of the New York Times tweeted this comment. She said, "The hard left seemed as hate-filled as alt-right. I saw club-wielding Antifa beating white nationalists being let out of the park." It didn't take more than a few minutes for the backlash. One responder tweeted, "Don't buy into the false equivalency like Trump and sympathizers." Soon, Stolberg said that she was rethinking her earlier tweet and modified the next tweets. In a recent column, Austin Peterson wrote that you can reject Antifa and communists and alt-right Nazis at the same time. Unfortunately, he observed that Antifa activists are gathering steam and seem to be protected from much scrutiny because of the way the press covers riots and street violence. The obvious solution is to condemn evil, hate, and violence wherever it occurs and from whatever source. Politicians and media would be wise to learn. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett. Now playing, rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and my guest is Carrie Severino, Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network. And I mentioned some of her credentials. I did not mention that she actually clerked for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And Carrie, I have heard in the news recently, I know this is not such a shock to you, but Justice Thomas was actually not featured at the Museum of African American History. Amazing.
Yep, it's kind of. I mean, frankly, probably the most significant and powerful black man in our country right now.
Yeah,
and he has an incredible career, and boy, what a life story too. Is coming up from very poor beginnings, raised by his grandparents. And such an inspiring story. They kind of forget him. They have Colin Kaepernick in there. They've got a lot on Anita Hill, but they don't really mention him. So I think there's a really big blind spot. They don't see. I think they're imagining that all. There's only kind of one type of African American story they want to tell, and it doesn't include, unfortunately, a conservative, icon like Justice Thomas.
Yeah, well, I'd love to put you to work on that effort, but the one that you're involved in is much more important right now, just for the moment that we're in, where we have this opportunity to actually change the judiciary, to populate it with justices that will actually rule according to the Constitution. And tell us what you've got a specific sort of plan of action to do this. What is it?
Right, yeah, we just launched a $500,000 campaign of ads trying to bring light to this issue, because it's something that the Democrats have hoped that if they can just kind of use these quirky procedural things to block people, no one will notice. But we think people need to know that the Democrats are trying to block really the will of the people here in putting Donald Trump in place, in putting the Republicans in control of the Senate, saying this is the kind of judges we want. So we want people to call their senators to make sure they realize, and really whether your senator is Republican or Democrat, they need to know this is an issue people care about. We understand that if we don't have judges who are respecting the rule of law, respecting the Constitution, then we've just ceded a huge amount of power to people on the court who are really accountable to no one. So we need to make sure that we're getting the right people in there in the first place so that they're obeying the will of the people, which is how our Constitution is set up.
Let's take some calls. The number is 800-351-1212. And Keith is listening in from Michigan. Hi, Keith.
Hi. Hey, before I get into the whole meat of the matter of what I wanted to talk about, I want to just say, go green. I saw that you were with Michigan State. So.
Yep, Michigan State grad.
Well, it's all well and good. I mean, I've sent a lot of letters. I've sent emails. I've called my senators. I've even called other state senators to say, hey, we need to stop this filibuster of not sending judges through. And it just, all the response I get back is, thank you for your message. We'll consider it. And granted, Michigan has got some couple of Democratic senators. I don't think it's going to go very far, but still, it's like, what else can I do?
You know, it seems like sometimes that doesn't make a difference, but I'll tell you, they know. First of all, they know that for everyone who calls in, there's a lot of people who are sitting at home thinking the same thing who just don't get around to dialing it. So it actually is very valuable. And if their phones are ringing off the hook and their employees are going, oh, I can't, talk about anything else because I'm sitting here answering these phones all day, it actually does make a difference. I like to think that's maybe why Senators Peters and Stabenow returned their blue slip. They had an excellent nominee coming out of Michigan, Michigan Supreme Court Justice Joan Larson, and they were dragging their feet and claiming not to have any idea who she was, even though she just won an overwhelming election in their own state for her seat on the Michigan Supreme Court. So they finally did, but I think it was after people called in and really made their voices heard. So I do think it does make a difference, although it can be frustrating because you just get the form letter back from them. But it's worth doing, and we saw a little bit of movement right before the Senate went on break, mostly because I think Leader McConnell said we're not going on break yet, and they said, okay, all right, how about we confirm a few people and then we get to go home? He said, great. So there are some things that move. I think absolutely calling in, though, does make a difference. It's just that we don't always see it directly.
So don't let that discourage you.
Talk to your friend. Yeah, don't let that discourage you. Stay involved, and then tell other people about it too, because these are issues that those of us who are paying attention and listening to these shows like that may know about. But for a lot of people, this isn't your number one issue, and so you may not realize all of the picky details of how they're doing it. But people need to know because it should be something that people realize what's happening on. We can't let them have this happen in silence.
Carrie, can you talk a little bit about if we fail in this effort, if we don't get a lot of judges, sort of a change in the judiciary across all the circuit courts and just the federal courts, how does that affect the country?
Well, you can see a few examples just in some of the high-profile cases that are happening right now. I mean, look at some of the sanctuary city legislation, for example. You've got people who want to bring these cases. They pick a district judge they know is going to be favorable to their cause, and they get someone who will just absolutely disregard the legal standards and come up with whatever decisions they want. It's happened in those cases. It's happened in a lot of really significant cases, and you realize that the Supreme Court only takes less than 1% of the cases that are appealed to it every year. They can't fix everything. The appellate courts can't fix everything. We need to have people all the way down the system who are going to be honest, upright in their approach to the law. So I think it's something that is so significant. And, whatever your issue that you care about the most is if it's pro-life stuff, if it's the right to bear arms, if it's limited government and making sure that the Constitution's limits are respected, all of those things, even if you have a Congress a White House who's on your side. The courts are going to get in there, and they can often cause mischief if they just start saying, well, that's not what we think. You need to have people who are going to respect that rule of law in the courts, because that's our kind of last protection of our Constitution.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners are particularly concerned about the issue of religious liberty.
That's coming up so much lately, and that's coming up before the Supreme Court as well. But you can see in how many of those cases have gone throughout the country that you've got a lot of the courts who kind of think of that as a second-class right, and don't really read the First Amendment as it's written. I mean, it's the first right listed in the Constitution's Bill of Rights, and yet they kind of think of that as, well, that's kind of, that's not very, very chic or very in vogue anymore. We need judges who are going to look at the Constitution and say, this is what I have to follow, even if I'm not religious myself, or even if I'm not the same religion as this person who's bringing the lawsuit. These are our American values, and that's an issue it's coming before the Supreme Court this year in a cake artist case coming out of Colorado, but it's coming up, we know, in so many different jurisdictions around the country, and a lot of those cases, unfortunately, the judges are not friendly and they're very hostile to religious freedom. So, again, the kind of judge, I think these judges that are getting nominated by Trump, not all of them maybe are even religious themselves, but if you are someone who respects the Constitution, you're going to respect that freedom of religion, because you know that is the principles that are in the Constitution. It's right there in black and white.
Carrie, you said that Judicial Crisis Network is putting money into an ad campaign. Where can people get the ad if they want to listen to it or spread it?
Well, we have a website called reformgridlock.com, and then you can also look at our website, judicialnetwork.com, and we're tweeting the ads out as well at Judicial Network is our Twitter handle. And so all of those are really good places to see that. And the website will also give you the number for your senator. So you can call, like your earlier caller did. And I maintain that is a very valuable thing. When I talk to people who work in these senators' offices, they say time and time again, it really does make a difference. And even when they're getting callers on an issue that maybe that wasn't their priority, suddenly it rises in rank as the senator's priority. So it's worth doing, and it's worth encouraging your friends to do.
Go to pointofview.net and you can click through if you didn't get those websites. And I would encourage you to make the call to the senator and just to check out the ads. Carrie, thank you so much for what you do and for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, pointofview.net, and you can click through. You can hear the ads. I've done that. And you can even, if you don't know how to reach your senator, it will tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take your calls for the next 30 minutes. Our call-in line is 800-351-1212. We have people waiting to talk about this issue of judicial confirmations and the judiciary, conservatism as a whole. We spoke about physician-assisted suicide in the first couple of segments of the show, and if you've got calls on that, we would love to hear from you. And certainly if you have anything to say or people that you know in Houston that we should be praying for, give us a call, 800-351-1212. And during the break, check out pointofview.net.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and we are taking your calls at 800-351-1212 on all kinds of issues. Certainly, Tropical Storm Harvey. We have been talking about that on the whole program throughout, and we've been getting a lot of sort of comments and pieces of information that we didn't know, and also prayer requests. And I do want to send you to pointofview.net if you want to help out with disaster relief. It goes through Samaritan's Purse, and 100% of your gift goes that way. So go to pointofview.net. There's a banner there for it. We've also been talking about judicial confirmations. Carrie Severino was with us, and we've got a call on that issue from Jacob in Georgia. Hi, Jacob.
Hello. How are you today?
Great.
Good. Yes, my major concern is that the citizens will really take this thing serious about our First Amendment rights and the religious freedom, because at the point we are at now, we are living up under a dictatorship from the federal courts and the Supreme Court. And I think that if our president can elect, I think we have 140 or so vacancies in the federal courts and hopefully a couple more in the Supreme Court. If he can put people in there that not only is religious, but believe in the Constitution and believe in morals, and this is where our nation has fallen down, is because immorality has taken over and morals are being thrown out the door. And I'm urging people to look around and see what's going on in your schools, see what's going on in your churches, and all of these places. Evil is being accepted.
Yeah, the thing about when we're talking about the courts, too, what happens sometimes is evil is enshrined because of the courts, or perhaps with regard to our laws, evil is enshrined into our laws. And so, we as citizens who don't agree with those laws, sometimes through the courts, they're forced on us. So I appreciate your call just to remind us about, there are actually biblical principles and principles of morality that are at stake here. So thank you, Jacob. I appreciate your call. I do want to mention to you, ladies and gentlemen, many of you have been asking what you can do to help with regard to this tropical storm Harvey and all the devastation in Houston. And we're certainly encouraging people to help others in ways that they know about that they can do. Take the time to do that. Partner with Samaritan's Purse. That's the group we're partnering with. That's Franklin Graham's organization. They are on the ground. And we have a banner at pointofview.net, and you can make a gift to help that effort. Funds will be used to provide emergency aid. 100% of your gift will be sent to Samaritan's Purse to help victims. And you can give online at pointofview.net. There's a banner there that says Disaster Relief for Hurricane Harvey. It's now Tropical Storm Harvey. It's at pointofview.net, or you can mail a check to help out. P.O. Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221, and mark your check relief for Harvey. And so I want to encourage that and give you that opportunity. People are asking for it. And also, ladies and gentlemen, we're taking your calls. As I said, I got an email during the show here from Chelsea Yeoman. Chelsea often co-hosts here on Point of View. She appears on our Millennial Roundtable, and a lot of times on Friday. She's an attorney at First Liberty Institute, and she sent a request. It's actually a prayer request, and it has to do with Hurricane Harvey. And I'm just going to read it to you. I know we all prayed for everyone affected by Hurricane Harvey. Actually, the email is to the employees at First Liberty, but we get a peek into that because they're asking us to pray too. Would each of you please pray for Judge Mack? He's one of the clients of First Liberty Institute. He is the county coroner in Harris County in Houston. He's been on death scenes all weekend, Chelsea says. He mentioned that his chaplaincy program has enabled 30 churches to be on call to provide shelters, volunteers, and aid and relief right now. Chelsea tells us, and we know this from the news, the Red Cross is spread way too thin and unable to help out in certain areas. The chaplaincy program is filling the gap and is a central coordinating point for relief to this area. So we need to be in prayer for the chaplains that are working on the ground. Often it's the churches and the Christians that are, because they can get close to the situation, they can see where the needs are. I know that was the case in Hurricane Katrina. And so that is very important here. So we are taking your calls at 800-351-1212. And, I did want to mention, there's a piece of news. I guess it's pretty much breaking news, quick news. I better update you a little bit. Apparently in Houston, it's marching back to the Gulf where it's expected to strengthen again. That's what's happening with the hurricane tropical storm now. Emergency planners in Houston's neighboring Fort Bend ordered the mandatory evacuation now because they're getting some relief of about 110,000 people from areas that will be flooding by the Brazos River. So that's a lot of evacuations. The river's expected to hit a record 800 to 900 year flood mark. It's going to be at 56.1 feet soon, if it's not there yet. The National Weather Service reports the deaths of 5 people in the wake of this hurricane. So that is the latest piece of news. This apparently we're going to have a little bit of sort of reprieve, I guess you could say, but we know that more is coming after it strengthens. So we are taking your calls here at Point of View, 800-351-1212. Let's go to David in California. Hi, David. Let me click you in. Hi, David. Thank you for calling in.
Oh, much better. Are you Carrie?
I'm Penna.
Oh, Penna. Hi. I didn't see your name on the website.
Carrie's gone. She was our guest for the last half hour, and she's with Judicial Crisis Network. I'm hosting.
Oh, sure. Yeah, those people in Houston are going to sure need that. Have you ever heard of the Kelo decision?
Yes.
Yeah, that's for listeners that aren't aware of it. About 10 years ago, maybe now, the Supreme Court, in one of the most corrupt decisions that everybody right and left and center agree on, is that eminent domain can now be used for private developers. And if you have a big old disaster like what happens in Houston right this moment, all of this land can be now targeted by some big developer and kick everybody off at so-called fair market value, and then they get to use the land for their own developments rather than, for the first 200 years of this country, eminent domain would only be used for a school or a hospital or some, county sewer system, something that was for the good of the region. And but now it can be used for private developers if they promise they can raise more taxes than you're paying. And disasters are a pure target for this. So apparently, the shoreline properties are going to be very desirable.
There's so many repercussions from something like this. As we're in the middle of it right now, we don't think about. There's so much that's going to be around for a long time that we have to clean up, and that's going to make big changes. It's just sort of hard to process it here, in the days that this is happening. Thank you for bringing that up. But didn't you have something else that you wanted to communicate?
Absolutely.
We only have about a minute and a half before the break.
Well, if you've ever heard of Project Censored, I think they're projectcensored.org. This year they did their list of the 25 most censored stories, and the number 5 story is that refugees can now be slammed into work camps. If I understand right, the World Bank has now developed these economic zones, and so these refugees, if they're slammed into these work camps, they lose their legal status as a refugee in declaring amnesty or whatever, and because they've got a job in these work camps. And so it becomes basically a sweatshop magnet. The more refugees you can create, the more you can crash down wages, slam people out of civil rights.
Can you give me an example of where this has happened in the U.S.?
It's not so much in the U.S. at the moment, But it's in Syrian refugees are being locked down in Jordan. If you go to that number 5, like I say, Project Censored, and it's the number 5 issue this year.
Thank you.
For 2016, yeah.
Wow.
Hey,
I just wanted to kind of see how that related to Harvey, but thank you for alerting us to that. And David, I appreciate your call.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will continue during this final segment to take your calls with regard to not only the judicial crisis, but also the crisis that the Houstonians are facing right now. And we'd love to hear any news that you have that maybe we haven't heard, or a prayer request if you've got somebody there that we should be praying for. 800-351-1212. We'll be back with more of Point of View.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 new cadets at the United States Military Academy at West Point do not want to wear the tar bucket. If you're not familiar with the uniform of West Point cadets, when on parade, cadets wear a plumed shako hat, or as they are commonly called, a tar bucket. The cadets object to wearing the hat because it would force them to remove their turban. That is a problem chiefly because the cadets are Sikh and the turban is a religious observance for the men. So while the United States Army has provided accommodation for Sikh soldiers in the past, this new lawsuit questions whether that accommodation need extend to the parade grounds. And it is an interesting question. Clearly, forcing the cadets to remove their turban would be, in the words of the cadets, blasphemous. Yet there is something to the tradition and uniformity found in the military dress of our nation's military academies. Congress, thankfully, has helped provide guidance in the settling of such matters. In the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, Congress insists that the government identify its compelling interest and restrict the free exercise of religion in the least restrictive manner possible whenever a citizen alleges a substantial burden to his free exercise of religion. RFRA does not guarantee an outcome in any case, but it does make the government justify its behavior. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Well, you know, Politico didn't waste any time. This morning they came out with a criticism of President Trump because apparently he is going to the area tomorrow, but he's not going directly into Houston. He's trying to leave space for the first responders in Harris County emergency management, and he doesn't want to get in the way. He doesn't want to be a detriment to all of that. And so Politico is, of course, critiquing that. Why are we not surprised? I do want to go back to one, kind of, I guess, political issue. Some people are critiquing the decision whether or not to evacuate early on. Of course, now it's hard for people to get out, people that stayed upon the beginning of this. And, it's really, it's best to evacuate if you can. And the governor said that when you're in low-lying areas, even if you don't have a mandatory evacuation order. But this was one of the calculations, apparently, that the mayor had actually sort of went into his decision not to order mandatory evacuation. It seems people who are not from Houston are blaming us for not evacuating, says a certain comment on a news article. Just a reminder, we have about 6.5 million people in the city and the surrounding areas. The city did an evacuation during Hurricane Rita back in 2005. And over 100 people died trying to leave the city. It took people 16 to 24 hours for a simple 3-hour road trip to get to their destination. Lots of people had their cars stalled and were left stranded. It was horrible. It seems like people would have wanted us to evacuate and get caught in floods. I don't know what that meant, but please don't tell us how we should have reacted when you have no idea what we've been through. So, that's one of the calculations. I don't know, though, whether certain areas could have done better with it. Now, in hindsight, of course, it's easy to speak in hindsight, could have done better with a mandatory evacuation, but it's possible they could. And I'm sure people will be, quarterbacking and armchair quarterbacking that in the future. So we'll see what happens with that. But we are taking your calls at 800-351-1212 if you would like to weigh in on really what's happening down in Houston. And also, if you've got any extra pieces of information. I mean, it's just all kinds of information coming in right now. And I remember back to the first days of this when it really hit a small beach town. I think that town was called Rockford. And the mayor there, he was pretty strong about evacuation. He said, everybody needs to evacuate. Get out now. He said, those that are going to stay, you probably saw this on the news. It's unfortunate, but they should make some type of preparation. Mark their arm with a Sharpie pin. Put their Social Security number after their name. In other words, we can't guarantee we're going to get you out. So, pretty much all the people that had decided to stay put in a lot of these areas now have been forced to stay put because of the roads. Somebody in Rockford was actually trapped in a house that caught fire and died. So here they have a hurricane and they also get a fire. Isn't that sweet? That was the first death in this whole storm. But that town, I think, that's the first town where everything really hit back early on in the weekend. So in Harris County, the message that was out there was local officials know best. That's not necessarily true. They don't necessarily have all the information that the federal officials have, but they do have the authority. So they were the ones that got to make the call. I hesitate to even bring that up in a sense because right now the situation is what it is, and they're dealing with it as it is. And so that's where we are. And I think we need to just pray for these people. And again, I wanted to point you to pointofview.net where you can actually help out. If you need a way to help out, we've got one. And we've got a banner there that will help you to do that. It's called Disaster Relief for Hurricane Harvey. It's now Tropical Storm Harvey. And any gift that you give, you can do it right there online. It goes directly to Samaritan's Purse, 100% to help out in this situation. I want to go back to the issue we were discussing having to do with judicial confirmations, because there is a U.S. Senator, one of the really good guys, James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma. And you would think that as Carrie Severino described the situation where all it takes is just changing the way we do things, perhaps a change in a rule to get some of these confirmations done quicker, you'd think this would have been done. You'd think that Charles Grassley, the head of the Judiciary Committee, a Republican, or Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, would have gotten this going. But Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma has a proposal to change how the Senate confirms presidential nominees. for federal judgeships. And also, this would his proposal works for that and all the nominees for the executive branch. It would break the gridlock that has sparked a nationwide campaign to staff the bench in federal government, and that's, of course, the campaign we discussed with Carrie Severino and the Judicial Crisis Network. They're spending a lot of money on an ad campaign. A record number, as she said, of Donald Trump's nominations to fill these positions, including key positions not only on the judiciary, but in the State Department. Rex Tillerson is kind of on his own. There's not that many people helping him right now. Defense Department, Treasury Department, Justice Department. These are all filled with Obama holdovers. Their nominations that President Trump has made are being slow-walked in the U.S. Senate, preventing the 3 million employees of the federal government. That's a lot when you really think about it. But anyway, preventing them from carrying out vital parts of the president's agenda. His agenda is being stalled out because he doesn't have the people. Senator James Lankford has just a simple rules change that would help, and that's the one that we were discussing about the 30 hours of debate time. This 30 hours of debate time is being demanded by the Republican or the Democrats, but it's not necessary. He says at the current rate, it will take 11 years to fill the executive branch. This is obstruction, and certainly one of the fixes would be a nuclear option. But actually, James Lankford says there's actually a rules change you could make to reduce floor debate for executive nominees from 30 hours to 8 hours or less. It sounds pretty good. Not pretty simple, not that hard, not that painful. Let's take a quick call. We've got someone calling in from Amarillo, Texas. Melissa, thanks for calling in.
Hi, Penna. I wanted to just ask the listeners to pray. I think the greatest thing that we can do for the people in Houston right now is pray, but we need to pray specifically. You know, the atmospheric pressure here over the Panhandle, is where I'm at, is kind of locked in. It's locked that storm there where it's at, causing it to continually spin and drop more and more rain. And I think we need to pray and ask the Lord to redirect the winds, to disperse the storm and pull it on through so that those people can have relief. And so I'm asking the listeners to pray and to intercede and ask the Lord to cause that storm to disperse, to fall apart, and not go out and gain more strength and come back in on them again.
I love that. Let's pray for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to go off the air and end the program. Let me encourage you to pray for the lifting of the pressure. I know we even have some here in Dallas. I mean, I feel it's very oppressive. So people in Texas, but really all over the country, let's pray for the lifting of that. So this storm will not do what it's projected to do and go back and do more damage. Ladies and gentlemen, I enlist you to join us in that prayer. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll see you tomorrow here on Point of View.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? You know, some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change. But how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God